La novedad de este día
The new thing for today is that something exists that we call the relator, that James Harvey said exists, relators. And well, what relators do is not really give a summary of what was done the previous day, but rather try to extract the lines or what has been actually moving the group of those of us at this symposium. The greater or lesser success of this narrative will depend on the person who has to do it. And either because I'm lucky or unfortunate, it's my turn to do so today. We're beginning this second day of the symposium after yesterday, the first day that started like today with a short praying pilgrimage to an Ignatian place and ended in the very best possible manner with a prayer on the basis of the beautiful songs and the fantastic interpretations and performances of our acoustic Jesuits. Our acoustic Jesuit, I want to thank Jorge Cristobal Enrique for the very good moments that we spent thanks to them. And between those two moments, the day of yesterday focused on the text of the exercises. When any author is writing a text, the text belongs to the writer, to the author. It's the author's work, the author's creature. And when the text is completed, it is delivered so that it is read. And then the text in some way ceases to be exclusive property of its author, because really it is the readers who in fact give meaning to the texts on the basis of a series of operations which involve a number of different elements. This becomes even more clear when the text, as is the case of the exercises, was not written in fact to be read, but rather this is a text that was born on the basis of the experience of a man within a community, a concrete and specific faith community, a text offered for its to provoke, cause, lead, and enlighten towards an experience. And this is why it is understandable that the text itself is a text searching for transformation, and it is presented to us always as an unfinished text. It is a text, furthermore, that came to be in the 16th century. So then it was conceived within the framework of a culture, of a vision of the world, and a specific theology. We have then 5 centuries of transmission of the text of the exercises. From the literary standpoint, today, people highlight the importance of the reader because it is the reader who can find new meanings to the text, either on the basis of the adapting of the reader to what the text offers, or on the basis of the concrete specific experiences with which the reader gets close to the text itself, but also from the standpoint of reflection about tradition and about the transmission of faith in the church. It is a well-accepted information today that this transmission entails change. Yes, Catholic tradition would rather talk about going in deeply, about growth, maintaining what existed already. And we as Catholics are not happy. We don't like to think that things change. We tend to function more on the basis of accumulation. But in practical terms, this enrichment may entail, and in fact has done so, giving up some truths that seemed totally absolute and impossible to change. Obviously, that the situation in which we are nowadays is not the same as the one in the 16th century, and not even the one that was at the beginning or midst of the 20th century seems to me very clear. Proof of this was the presentations that we listened to yesterday about gender and exercises, a subject that the Catholic Church comes up quite strongly 20 years after Vatican II. Exercises given to and by Protestants, or as well the subject of the communities, subject of the exercises, compared to the individual retreatant, who was typically the person in the experience of the exercises. The presentations yesterday talked to us very clearly about adaptation of the text and adaptation of the exercise experience, something that, on the other hand, is nothing new. A text that is 500 years old has had to forcibly go through many changes, some forgetfulness, rediscoveries, different accents and standpoints. We come maybe from times in which the highlight has been given to going back to the original text, to the strength that this very old text still possesses. And today, in fact, we face the very original and supposed use of this text in environments and situations for which very possibly Saint Ignatius didn't think of. The exercises can be a valid tool for women and Christians in non-Catholic churches. This was manifested yesterday very clearly. Also, that a group might be the subject of the exercises seems to be clearly reality right now. But precisely, these innovations are also exerting an influence on the conception and on the concretion of the exercises, the text and the experience in itself. In what way does the gender perspective or the Protestant tradition enrich both the way in which the exercises are given and also the interpretation itself of the text of the exercises? And with this wide use that is being given to the exercises, we also have the question of whether we can continue to call or define as exercises all the experiences that today come under that name. Can we get to a sufficient union of souls as regards what makes the exercises be what they are? Maybe yesterday we were in somewhat of a hurry when we worked on the question of what can there be that is non-negotiable or something that you cannot give up about the exercises. Even if one doesn't know much about history of theology, there are so many non-negotiable things that come to mind, things that in fact were negotiated at some point in history. And I am tempted to think that absolutely everything is submitted to the law of not being definite, especially because so many things that sometimes are considered non-negotiable are in fact just habits and traditions that can be more or less defensible. I always remember my experience in Frankfurt, where I studied a faculty in which one could talk about absolutely everything. One could talk about whether the Virgin is immaculate or not, and what that means. When we tried to change the way in which one would bless, before having lunch or supper, I remember being told tradition is tradition, meaning tradition is tradition. And of course, nothing was changed. However, I said temptation. Why? One is tempted to think that there is nothing definite, because quickly you get realities that I see as very permanent and that one can find as well in the experience of the exercises. Vulnerability, especially that of others. The kenotic movement, on the basis of which what is down is the revelation of God. The call to transformation as a constant dynamics coming from the action of God in the world and in every person. The awareness and the conscience that everything that we have is a gift, a received gift, and so it's not something that is our property. In a certain way, there must exist some realities that are so important in the experience of the exercises that they must be forcibly always present, even when they may adapt to the diverse situations of those who accompany and go through the experience of the exercises. Do these realities exist? This question is in fact twofold or more. It could mean a group of questions. What formal external elements belong to the experience? The exercises consist in giving a means and an order, but then which should be? the means and the order. What material content elements must be present in the experience of the exercises? If the exercises want to actually place the child in relation with its creator and Lord, it would seem then that these two actors have to be present always. If the exercises consider that the way to, in fact, establish this relationship is done fundamentally through the contemplation of the life of Christ, then what is the importance of Christ within this process? As you can see, I don't have many answers at all. I don't think we should have the answers the first day. What does seem clear is that this text, written such a long time ago, given to us all, for any person who desires so to go through the experience, is still a text which is important for many, also for us. What seems very clear is that this text is not dead at all, but rather it is giving lieu to many and diverse realizations. And maybe the days that we have in front of us maybe will be useful, so that within the atmosphere that we had yesterday, we can go in deeply into the aspects that are still fundamental of the experience and the text of the exercises. And this is what we want to do with today's work, tomorrow's work from another standpoint, and with the days after, when we are going to come close to the text of the exercises, close to the experience of the exercises from different standpoints. So in this way, we begin the second day.
Yo no dije lo de Enrique, pueden no aplaudir, ¿eh?
I didn't say the thing of Enrique, you may not clap. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to start then with this second day, a day devoted to the exercises in the social margins. And now I will ask, please, Dan Harnett to come along.
Muy buenos días, bienvenidos.
Good morning and welcome. I have a very quick message before starting this session. We have Adolfo Nuño with us today and tomorrow. You will see he's here with a camera, which is quite big, by the way. He will be collecting material, pictures and images. If someone does not feel comfortable with that, just tell him, and he will make sure that your image won't be shown. Then we might ask some of you to make a very short interview, and we will just tell you at the proper time. That's it. Thank you very much. Hello, good morning. Good morning to everyone. And good afternoon or good night to those that are away online from so many countries. We welcome you to the International Symposium 2022, MYSTAGOGIES of the Spiritual Exercises, 500 years afterwards, from Spain, the Spirituality Center at MANRESA. And I would like to invite you to start the day with a moment of silence, to be aware of the presence of the Spirit in us, in we are, we move, we exist.
Gracias iniciamos.
Thank you. We shall start. So we will now gather the thinking and the ideas of what have been of the presentations these 2 last days. Carlos COUPEAU, teacher of the Theology University at Deusto, will make this presentation. Carlos and Diego Molina, who was the moderator on Tuesday, they are both members of HEY, which is a spiritual group, Ignatian group, and they are a member of the counseling board, advising board. He has the floor. Thank you very much, Sandra. Welcome. Good morning to everyone. The question to each one of you, what elements of the exercises do I identify as conducive to these people, serve to energize the groups during the second round of sharing on Tuesday, 14th. Perhaps this seems to you already a distant past. The question referred to people who live in context like the Augustine Hill, people who struggle to find peace and continue living together, or who try to rebuild their lives in their just a few years ago unpredictable condition of forced displaced persons like Antoinette. People who from Mexico and other Latin American countries migrated to the United States and now seek the only God who could give them, as we were told, the courage to leave my home. The question Thank you. I was saying that that question about elements meant aspects of the text or method, one element that is neither in the text nor belongs to the method, and is the activity of taking notes. To be sure, the text does advise note-taking for the retreatants, but I'm talking and I'm saying that neither the text nor the method state that the person giving the exercises takes notes also and examine themselves on them. Indeed, while José García de Castro pointed out in his evening presentation that the so-called autograph recommends to note and to take notes, the autograph never mentions that the retreat directors should continue to take notes. The Ignatian practice being so evident, we tend to forget it. Ignatius went from taking notes as a retreatant to continue taking notes as a retreat director. Again, we need to distinguish 2 stages in Ignatius practice to understand that the text of the exercises entails our vocation as companions to continue taking notes. From those notes of Ignatius the retreatant, we only have scant information 500 years later about the final product, about the exercise, taking notes, improving and contrasting them over a quarter of a century. However, we are left with this book that summons us all. In light of this implicit text, I want to share some 17 pages of my notes taken on the second day of the symposium. I want to share that with you. These are almost 7,000 words, 6,897 exactly, many of which are repeated. Actually, they made up a vocabulary of some 2,000 different words taken from both the English and Spanish, depending on the speaker's choice. They are nouns, verbs, forms, prepositions, conjunctions, so on and so forth. If we were to select the most significant nouns, I mean, those that repeat more than 10 times, if we were to select those verbs repeated more than 2 times, we would obtain clouds of words similar to these that you are seeing now in the image. These word clouds serve a triple objective. First, to summarize the last day's sessions, then to challenge our reflection, but what we see in them. Third, and as if it were a logbook, to allow us to keep a certain record of our journey through the day. And I go back to the first point. Please, can you share the image? Thank you. So it's important to see what draws our attention, God and Jesus in particular, experience, poverty, people. We need to compare people and poverty, life, margins, reconciliation, healing, suffering, but also joy and accompaniment. So everyone is invited to reflect on what the person is feeling. These exercises allow us to recover our memories and our shared memories in particular. This allows us to see whether before starting today's session, these clouds answer to the expectations that we have before Monday or Tuesday, or maybe they overcome our expectations. I'm not gonna read, but on the screen, you can see some of the expressions that were used during the conference that just, take that day back to our memories today. Second point, by way of research. On a more organizational level, I offer these clouds to Javier Meloni and the steering committee in order to investigate and decide if the content meets the heading of the second day, exercises as a means to help people live their situation. The expectations of many of us were overcome by the quality of presentations in general. Dan Harnett captured our attention with the testimonial character and biographical tone, with his honesty, clarity of exposition, and his well-crafted simplicity. He seduced us to a certain evangelical beauty that is also part of the history of Sarah Agustino. Frank Janin, Sandra and Ramon Corona, and Sasha Bermudez Coleman put before our lives stamped by suffering in Rwanda, Burundi, lives blessed by the search for God in the US, and lives doomed by forced displacement in Australia. They brought to us news about lives that leave no room for indifference. They spoke of them with affection, recognizing them in their dignity, awakening our sensitivity. Indeed, they 5 achieved a dramatic reorientation of the symposium. We could speak of a change of gaze and a refocusing. From looking at the text of the exercises on Monday, we were induced to look at those who go through the exercises, the retreatants. From the here is how the 3 divine person gazed, we ended up entering into their perspective and looking at those whom the Trinity looks at. Did you notice it too? Did you notice how on Tuesday we moved from the text and its adaptations to the retreatant and his/her situation? I do not mean the modo y orden, mode and order that Javier gave us, unexpectedly, we realized that this turn, this twist, was a kind of mediation done by Ceci, Patricia, Lupita, Antoinette, that brought us back to ourselves and to the accompaniment at sunset, without necessarily intending it, without it being planned. The discourse of thoughts brought us to the consideration of the so what that Elizabeth was asking on the first day. And without intending it either, we began to see it focusing on companionship. Maite Valls referred to accompaniment in 4 aspects. Diego Molina invited us to go deeper, affirming that if on the first day we were considering the aspects that belong to the exercise experience, on Tuesday the topic of accompaniment was more emphasized. Javier Meloni put it in terms of we start accompanying for, then we accompany with, and finally we accompany from. Finally, Laura Rius explained that what's fundamental is not an element, but a set of elements articulated by the one who gives modo y orden, mode and order. I repeat this, we could have come to something like a first week, or more radically, we could have ended up talking about the principle and foundation for people diminished in their freedom, but not in their capacity and will to pray. Joaquin Salord even questioned whether everything we were saying about accompaniment was oriented to the margins. But the fact remains, we did come to the accompaniment. Still, the text of the program seemed to aim at focusing our attention on the situation. The program described it as precariousness, marginalization, destructuring, both personal and social. Perhaps we owe Father Harnett a better way of dealing with this dimension, for by warning us that contemporary society tends to reduce the person to his or her circumstances, our conversation dutifully avoided situations to focus on the impact on our conscience. And I want to underline, to emphasize this point as a contemporary receptio. Still in the late 20th century, A. Paul Dominic distinguished only 3 types of retreats of a social nature. First, retreats for social commitment. So, for commitment. Second, retreats for social consciousness, to awaken consciousness. Third, retreats in social context. In the space of just 2 decades, we have gone from adapting the exercises, what was written many years ago, to adapting exercises to retreats to sensitize long-time retreatants, to adapting the exercises to open them to minister to and console new retreatants on the margins of society. I do believe that this evolution is really bold, as was told on Tuesday. It's the result, it's also fruit from globalization. A globalization lived in contexts that are more and more urban and plural, where diversification, also religious, but not only religious, has been syncretized. Diversification on schools, work, hospitals, or prisons, just to point some of these spaces, have given rise to a new spirituality also in spirituality centers. If you allow me to say, a little bit cynically, where there was first a religious balance, and then we needed the coexistence of religion and atheism. Now we see that there is an interest for the other if the other is of interest to enough people. Third point, verification. These representations that highlight the higher frequency with which words appear in my notes, these clouds of words. Let me see them, show them again. These clouds of words allow some feedback about what we discussed. Thus, for example, going back to the text of the program distributed the first night, this first cloud with the verbs only in Spanish shows that, in fact, on Tuesday we were dealing with topics associated with helping and living, giving, accompanying, wanting, being. This first conclusion, therefore, confirms the change of orientation that has already been noted. Just as the word text almost disappears in the word clouds, we can see in the apex God experience, and here we see the word poor. So as I was saying that just as the word text almost disappears in the word clouds, so do the interpretative activities associated with the text, or those activities associated with taking women into consideration or taking Protestants, groups, community subject, etc. into communication. But I would like to highlight most notably, and in relationship to the Monday's assembly, Christ and Trinity yield the space to Jesus and God. Jesus a little bit smaller, you can see that on the left of the word experience. And I'm not making this up. Please check this in the final edition. I did not have the text, I only had my notes, so this should be checked and compared to the written text. But speakers really express themselves in terms of Jesus preferentially. Does this have to do with the chosen theme? I wonder. So the word experience and its plural dominate because the word appears in plural and singular. We note, moreover, that while person, encounter, or poverty, these words, be it of structural, spiritual, or solidarity type, were recurrent words, the word poor, between experience and poverty, remember, was less so. Perhaps echoing Van's advice, both in calling us to the encounter and in avoiding the use of people rather than poor, since they are sacred ground. And this brings me to the point that the symposium has get to a convergence point. We have been listening to each other for a couple of days, so we are in focus and we should congratulate each other, all of us. But pay attention to the dialogue that follows the presentations and the assembly. Those working at the centers listen to the people working at the margins. People with marginal sensitivity listen those to wanting to have an echo with their speech. I'm just mentioning a couple of cases, but it could be good to have more examples. And I get to my conclusion. So we have a transition day today. The exercises that are offered are something marginal in the frame of the contemporary practice. There are exercises that are usually done in spiritual centers and houses. To what extent, I'm asking, the economic support that is forgotten in the presentation is key to really have a personal experience to an apostolical level. And then another note, which is maybe a little bit less marginal, could it be possible to have an interest in promoting reconciliation activities that does not go beyond, but gets closer to an interest of a profound encounter of people? For instance, in Rwanda and Burundi, can we have an interest in reconciliation that can be psychiatric, with others that can be politic, even though all these efforts might not be healing? Apart from spiritual reconciliations, to which we were all thinking of, would it be possible to think of exercises as religious acts, liturgic acts, performative discourse, to justify the proposal to make exercises of reconciliation that do not take longer than a week? The exercises have a social visibility, first in front of the Society of Jesus, beyond the province of Rwanda, Burundi, in front of Rome, in front of the people here in this forum, the local church, and so on and so forth. And the spirituality we're getting in today does matter. Beyond denomination, spirituality has something to say. It is up to us to pinpoint this aspect and make steps forward. Finally, today I invite you to think the exercises as our grammar for spirituality. In our search for meaning, we want to incorporate our activity, and in particular, the activity to focus our identity. In previous centuries, people thought that exercises were there to learn to preach, or they were underlining the methodology. Now, I propose you to consider the exercises as a grammar for the language of life that takes into account the spiritual dimension. In a time of great processes like the secularization, for instance, we vindicate spirituality at all levels of knowledge. This is already happening. And in this context, exercises and their rules, the mode and order, or even their interpretation, the interpretation in tradition of the text, can represent a syntax, a grammar. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not Christopher, I'm ECKHART. I'm glad to be here. Muy buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone.
Hay un efecto acústico.
There is an acoustic effect. I don't know whether it depends on my voice or what it depends on. So, it's a pleasure for me to share with you my exercise, which is an exercise of repetition, really. As a relator, I have to talk about yesterday, and yesterday indeed was a very rich day. Okay, now. We had as a central subject the exercises and other cosmovisions, cosmologies, and spiritualities. We started with Javier's presentation, and then with the three interventions of Malulu, Karin, and Vico. And after, in going and return exercise, we had to focus on what was specifically Ignatian in this path to initiation, and what can we learn from other traditions in order to enrich Ignatian spirituality. And we shared in the assembly with Sandra many questions and standpoints. And then also the African Mass helped us to see a much wider horizon, the horizon of our forebears, of our grandparents. So then my first point here is Saint Ignatius, our grandfather, because the forebears, those who came before us, are very present in the Amazon, Micronesia, and African celebrations, and also explicitly in the interventions yesterday of Malulu and Vico. Ignatius, so our grandfather and ourselves are in a process of transmission, and the exercises have this grandparenting ability as to exercises. That is, they encompass tradition, but they don't close the process of transmission of tradition. As we said on the very first day, it is an unfinished text, a generative text. It is the text of the retreatant in interaction with his or her maker, an educator. So it's the fertility of the process, it's generative. And because of this, we need that grandfather, Ignatius, who can be imperative, but at the same tender, as Vico said. Then the cave is empty. And in the way that Ignatius's tomb in Rome is empty, and this was said, it's a springboard effect, meaning it's not Ignatian tourism that we do. It is not just that we write and talk about Ignatian history to remember and visit places, but rather just for us to walk in his wake, to follow along his paths. But now they will be our own paths. And when they tell you, if you meet Ignatius along the way, kill him, because the exercises are Ignatian, but not to make Ignatian history, not to have a biography or hagiography of Ignatius, not at all, but rather to be Ignatius ourselves. So if you encounter Ignatius along the way, kill him. And here I quote Javier, only what emerges to conscience can be released and freed. And Javier talked to us as well about the shadows. The shadows, if you allow the psychoanalyst to say, shadows that are big chunks of the unconscious, like dreams we cannot control and master. Our dreams, not at all. And not even can we control and master our shadows. We project shadows onto others, onto the world, onto nature, onto God. So then how to invite that shadow, that individual unconscious into our exercises, individual shadows, yes. That is the side of myself I don't like, or the side of myself I don't live. But in any case, it is a part of me escaping my own domination, and also collective, of a whole peoples, of a church, of an order. These are shadows. And Saint Gregorius he said, only what has not been assumed has not been healed. Redeemed, we could also say, and we have to assume then the unconscious in the spiritual exercises. It is not a psychoanalytical interpretation that we're going to go for in the exercises, but yes, we should assume this for it to be healed.
Listening to your speech, Karin, there you are. I loved your speech. It was excellent, but I had the question, why was it integrated in the part of other spiritualities? And I remembered discussions in the 90s between specialists of Ignatian spirituality and Franz Jalisch, and those who said, this is not Ignatian. It's a kind of oriental meditation of mindfulness or exercise, and it's not Christocentric, and so on and so on. And Franz always said, no, it's Ignatianissimo. It was very important for him. So I think looking from heaven, now he will be satisfied with your presentation. Anyway, those displacement mentioned by Javier, Eastern displacement from the Occidental subject towards a beyond of subjectivity, from thinking, mental activity towards the bodily awareness, from words to silence. All this, you described it very well as key elements of Franz Jalisch method: being present, perceiving, being mindful, being aware, and your desire was, could we call the Jalisch method Ignatian contemplative exercicios according to Franz Jalisch? La pregunta de Frederick.
The question, Frederick's question, is it maybe being syncretic? Is it syncretism? And there was a first answer coming from Javier saying, if the elements are conserved, it's or preserved, it's an integration. And if these elements have deteriorated, it is syncretism. So first time of an answer, but I find it interesting because, of course, I have a European notion of syncretism, but I've been in Mexico, so I learned in communities in Chiapas that this cultural crossing and this spiritual mix is part of tradition in Mexico and in Europe. We also have syncretism, of course we do, between what is Hebrew, Greek, Roman, and we, the Germanic peoples, also have syncretism. So it's at times a very controversial concept, isn't it? The famous syncretism as an issue. And we have to see that the culture, in a way, well, there is always this inculturation of spirituality in any society, in any history. And on the basis of my personal experience, spiritual care in the health therapeutic world finds as well these spiritual quests that very often come from agnostic or even atheist people. And so then how to establish a dialogue between the specific Ignatian spirituality and those persons who are or have a contemporary search from the secular, agnostic, or even atheist standpoint or starting point. Then one part of Javier's presentation has to do with the luminous shadow. We don't only have the shadow or of the darkness of the first week, but also that of the third week, which is the shadow of the Passion, and most especially of Holy Saturday. It is the obedience of Jesus dead, who shares the way of being dead and buried. And it's not the sulfuric hell of the first week. Inferos in Latin means down. So this is a world that Jesus shares. And it is like in the icons of the Eastern Church, right? And also in Rudnik and the lovely mosaics, yeah? In order to release or take the dead back, but in a full acceptance of the receptiveness on Holy Saturday. It's the day when there is no action. So as to its solidarity with the dead, and it is a luminous shadow in silence. And Ignatius describes it this way. He says that the soul went down to hell, and taking from there the just souls and coming to the sepulchre and being risen, he appeared to his blessed mother in body and soul, fourth week then beginning. In the discussions that took place yesterday evening, we heard questions that are in fact have to do with the remains of other spiritualities. What is specific, what is Christological, what is Christic, and so on and so forth. And it is also a subject of the third week of the exercises. We live without God because, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, God on the cross lets himself be rejected out of the world. It is part of the history of salvation, that silence of God precisely. And indeed, yes, the neo-Gnostic risk exists, agnosis, full stop, a method without Christocentrism, but that gnosis exists as well. Inside the exercises, Ignatius in the second week talks about internal knowledge of the Lord, that through me has become man. I end with the criterion of its being universal, of its sharing other spiritualities and cultures, and that very beautiful criterion of Ignatius, quo universalis ut divinus, so meaning the more universal it is, the more divine it is. And indeed, I think that this can be an inspiration for us in order to go more towards the limits of this home, in order to find many people in need. I'm totally and absolutely convinced of the contribution of Ignatian spirituality. Thank you.